We now welcome back the wonderful Cindy Karsten. And Cindy is going to discuss the Association of Shelter Veterinarian Standards of Care in Animal Shelters, what they are, the resources, and the updates. Welcome back, Cindy. You remember the laser pointer?
Same. Well, good morning, everybody. Good to see you again. Welcome to newbies for today. I just got to say, the morning tea thing, love it. Feel like we're sort of missing out on that in the States. Might try to bring it back. That's something we held on to from our... Anyway, just letting you know I really enjoy it. So thank you all again for having me. Thanks for joining me this morning. Hopefully many of you have heard of the guidelines and that the update will be really exciting. I will try to make this as exciting as possible. But I too would like to begin today by acknowledging the Ugambe language speaking people who were the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on today. And I would like to pay my respects to all of the elders, past, present, and emerging, as they hold all the memories, traditions, cultures, and hopes of the people of Indigenous Australia. So here is a brief outline of our time together this morning. Just a bit of a history of why the guidelines were created. Sonia did an amazing job of introducing the 5 domains, so might just leave that part out. We'll talk about what's new and then how it is that you can all use this document in your work. Okay, so hopefully all the veterinarians in the room and everyone who works with a veterinarian are members of the Association of Shelter Vets. I can say I think it's a bargain. It's $75 US dollars a year to join. I think that's very reasonable, but I will let you all decide for yourselves how that fits into your budget. And the reason this organization was formed in the first place over 20 years ago was to help veterinarians working in shelters or with shelters start to have some community, to not feel so alone. Many of us, when we're out there, it feels like it's us. Alone, working in a very busy, hectic environment where we see some really interesting things. Interesting is a Midwest term for whoa. It's a polite term for that. So this organization is a great place where you can bounce ideas off of people and just start to feel like you have a community around you, even when it can feel like you're hanging out there solo. It is the organization that led to the board certification of shelter medicine that I talked about yesterday, and now, really exciting, we have an open access journal to publish research about shelter medicine. So this is the original document. It sort of feels like an antique at this point. Mine has all sorts of food stains on it. It really does work better if you put your favorite stickers on it. It was created in 2010. There were 14 authors, all veterinarians from different areas of focus. The framework for this was the 5 freedoms. The 5 freedoms of animal welfare was from the UK. It was really designed mostly for food animal welfare. It wasn't so much thinking about the sheltering system, but the goal of this document was to be a guide for anyone working with animals. It's been translated into many languages, and this in itself is not a regulatory document. I'm not gonna lie, there are times I wish I could be like, you need to do this, and just put it out there as something that needs to happen. It's not. I can't hold anyone's feet to the fire, nor do I believe in punishment. However, this document is incorporated into regulatory language. So, like say in the States, some councils might have, the functioning of the animal shelter must abide by the practices that are laid out in the Association of Shelter Vets, standards of care in animal shelters. But this in itself isn't a regulatory piece of work. And the reason we have guidelines is because there isn't, at least in the States, any sort of regulation for animal shelters. We don't have any one organization that sets a standard for what needs to happen in animal shelters. Sure, a few of our states have set minimums, and I will give you at best that's what they are. So they will give like a minimum size that a cage needs to be, minimum time that an animal would have to spend out of their cage, but really there's not anything. So there isn't, there's not really a place to go. So that is why the Association of Shelter Vets got together and was like, we need to give people something. There has to be something that we can talk about where we can share a common language, where we can help people understand what the expectations are of this immense work that they're doing. And also, my guess is most of you are pretty busy and you have a lot going on, and it can become very difficult to know what is the most important, like what can we do, what can we invest in to, for lack of a better term, get the most bang for your buck. So really helping to emphasize what's most important when we're sort of feeling like we're in just this sea of overwhelm. And then helping us understand our role in our communities. And then at the end of the day, the true goal of this document is to elevate the well-being of all animals that come in contact with the shelter. So, 2010, for many of us, seems like a lifetime ago. And as we talked about yesterday, shelter medicine has really evolved. So, in 2019, I don't know if anyone can remember that long ago, feels like a lifetime, the ASV board did assemble a task force of 19 veterinarians. I was fortunate enough to be invited to be one of them. The task force had 5 of the original authors and then 14 of us newbies. We're from all over the United States. We have different areas of study, different experiences, different roles that we've had at shelters in academia, different types of shelters, so the municipal, the private. We tried to get a real variety of folks to lend their experience and knowledge to this document. This is it. We started by, so that is us in Atlanta in the beginning of 2020. The goal was to do it all like this. But anyone remember what happened, I don't know, March 2020? It changed our course of action a bit. That was the only time we were in person until late spring, early summer of 2022. So all of this work together, these 19 people, we did it over Zoom. There's a little PTSD from that, that many hours in front of the Zoom. We started with literature review. There was quite a bit, thankfully, of research that came out between 2010 and 2020 that we got to review, so we started with that. The guidelines are made up of statements, so action statements, things that need to happen or be avoided in animal shelters. So that's what set up the scaffolding for this document. The new document has 13 different sections in it, and each of us were given 2 to 3 sections to work on, so each section had 3 to 4 authors working on it. We would work on our scaffolding of statements. We would bring it back to the bigger group. There was a lot of discussion. Finding consensus among 19 relatively stubborn and extremely knowledgeable individuals is difficult. And you sort of figure out what is most important to you, what can you sort of waver on. They came up, our system was we had a green, a red, and a yellow card. Mind you, Zoom. And So you'd be like, a green was like, yes, I agree. Yellow was, I agree, but I need some discussion. And red was like a no-go. So it was fun. It was fun. The association tried really hard to make this better for us. They'd send us snack packages for our long days on Zoom. They did a great job, although sometimes they sent us like these weird gluten-free gelatinous things that were horrid, but A for effort. And we did it. We got through it. This document was finalized in the end of 2022. It was approved by the original task force members. They all got to review it, so did the ASV board, and now it is published in the journal. You can download this for free off the interwebs. You can also purchase these. I have no idea what shipping would cost you, but for those of you paying attention today, I have brought some copies. Hopefully, through our time together, you will desperately want one. And so, if you answer Simone's questions correctly, you may find yourself going home with a complimentary copy. All right. So, for any document of this size and magnitude, it's really important to look at the context of which something was created. Again, we were in a global pandemic. That is not where we thought we would find ourselves. It is where we were when this is what we were working on. We were also in a time of really some quite horrific climate events, and it was also a time that George Floyd was killed in our country. So we had a fair amount of racial unrest as well, which led our industry to really reflect on how sheltering and our animal control, our animal management practices both contribute and continue to uphold social inequities in every community that they're in, including the ways that we intake animals, the way we transport animals, and the way we adopt them out. And so recognizing this really emphasized the need that we do need more accessible, non-punitive services for every pet owner in our community, and the benefits of being culturally responsible and responsive in our communities, and that we need, in shelters, we really need to work towards representing the diversity of our communities in everyone who works, volunteers, and comes into our shelter. So those were all the things that we didn't necessarily recognize when we were called upon to take part in this project, but it was something, thankfully, that we got to bring in to the work that we were doing. So the guiding principle of this document, of the first one, still holds true with the updated one, is that the reason this document exists is that we do know it is extremely important that when animals come into our care, we have to meet their physical and emotional needs, regardless of what your mission is, and regardless of the challenges that you're facing. Those aren't reasons to not meet the needs for animals. And again, sheltering, it has evolved, thankfully. We're not in the warehousing stages that we were in. And the second edition still holds true to the same, even though we have evolved, the second edition still has the same goals of the first one. They're lofty, not gonna pull that wool over your eyes, but they're good. So again, this is a tool to help everyone working in shelters compare how things are going with a common standard, to give guidance when you're like, I don't know what the heck to do, where I'm going, what I want to be doing. And then most importantly, again, prioritize what that is. And it's a living document. I'm sure there will be an update. I am not ready to talk about that because still recovering from the work that went into this one, but there will be, because we have to keep paying attention, because the world is evolving. It will continue to, and it's our responsibility to respond to that. A bit about what this document is and what it is not. This document provides the what to do and why it's so important to do it. It doesn't, however, tell you how. That's up to you, based on who you have working for you, the level of training, the resources available. That's the fun part you get to figure out. This document is for cats and dogs. It does not mean we don't find other furry, feathered, scaled creatures important. It's just that they need their own documents. This is big enough. If we were to include all of those, it would be a massive document. It would lose some of its emphasis. So those species are very important. A lot of what is talked about in here will also apply to other species, but this is really a focus on dogs and cats because it is most of what we see. But for the rabbit lovers in the room, the ASV is coming out with a much shorter, abbreviated, but some work on how to care for our rabbits in shelters. This is a document for animals that are within the care of shelters. It is not for community service, but giant caveat to that. Any place that community interacts with the shelter, so be that the intake or the outcomes, we managed to put that in here because it was really important to us that, you know, the shelter is part of the community. It's not separate. It's not us and them. It's all we. Okay, so I talked about the statements. This document is built on action statements. And every single statement is either going to be an unacceptable. This is something that no matter what needs to be remedied without exception. The next level is must. So this is really important if we're going to ensure humane care. Then there's the shoulds, which need to be achieved in most circumstances. It's also sort of the reason most of the statements ended up being shoulds, because when we had disagreement, we would sort of end ourselves up in the should category. And then ideals are things that would be great if we could achieve, something to always work for when the resources allow. So I was going to tell you how many action statements there are, but when I found out what it was, it seemed a bit overwhelming. It is over 600, not to alarm you, because the thing is, I'm sure you're already doing a lot of them. But that is what this document is built on. And then there is supporting text, again, about why it's so important that those are the action statements that we landed on. Okay, so what's new? Overall, we did shift the framework from the 5 freedoms to the 5 domains, which it sounds like you all are already very familiar with and starting to use, which is fantastic. We also wanted much more of an emphasis on community and the importance of how we interact with our community and how our success lies in the success of our communities and our ability to interact with them. The section that probably changed the most was behavior. The authors on the behavior section are boarded, most of them are double boarded in shelter medicine and animal behavior. And there's also been a ton of work done on behavior in the last 10 years. So this section is probably the one that changed the most. We also put a much bigger emphasis on that shelters need to be an approachable, healthy, and supportive place for all people, the people who work within the shelter, the people who seek help from the shelter, that it's not just about our animals. And then there's 2 brand new sections, forensics and disaster response. Okay, again, Sonia took this and did a fantastic job of presenting it, so I'm gonna just cruise through really quickly. 5 freedoms, lovely in their own right. The only thing is there's something sort of missing. And the way I think about it is our friend Bean here. right? So Bean, lovely little dude. He's getting fed. You can see his food bowl over in the corner. He seems to not be in any discomfort. There's no overt pain or disease, any signs of that he's exhibiting. He's able to be his best self up on his bed and not seemingly fearful or distressed outwardly as he hangs out here. But in Bean's mind, is he in a positive welfare state? Or are we just avoiding a negative welfare state for him? In his little Bean mind, does he think his quality of life is good? Potentially not. So it is why I'm really happy that we moved into the 5 domains. It came out in the mid-90s. Again, it was based on the 5 freedoms, and it worked. The whole reason it came about was to reduce animal welfare compromise. And it came out mostly for animals in research and teaching, but it's really for any animal living in confinement, which is exactly what we have in animal shelters. So it really helps us to look at the whole system and how it can qualitatively be looked at to look at welfare compromise and ways that we can make it better. And I think it's really important to recognize that you can have a positive welfare state even if all the 5 freedoms aren't met. So as an example, let's say we have a cat with a healing pelvic fracture who needs to be on cage rest. Okay, well, we've taken some of that cat's agency. It can't do all of its cat things, but we can keep them very comfortable. We can mitigate pain. We can make sure they're still enriched. We can still, obviously feed them well and everything. So, one of the freedoms may not be met, but you can still have an overall positive state. And the reverse is also true. You can be in a negative welfare state even if just one of the 5 freedoms isn't met. So, for example, let's say we have a dog living in our shelter. We feed them. We've kept them healthy, but they've been in there for a long time. They have no agency. They have no choice. So just that one freedom not being met means we have a negative welfare state that is something that needs to be addressed. So, there you go. But just know that the reason we switched to it in the guidelines, why we use the 5 domains, is because we want this document to help all people working in shelters achieve positive welfare for the animals in their care. And so that is why we chose to base it in that and not just the 5 freedoms, to have a document that helps us recognize how we can move animals into a positive state versus just avoiding a negative welfare state. Okay, some specifics. So I might have been one of the authors on the population management section. And so I made sure that there was some capacity for care calculations, some sexy numbers in there. We did expand the population management section a bit. I was also, not surprisingly, on the facility section and made sure that we had a lot more emphasis on multiple compartment housing, and we were even able to put some illustrations in of what that means. We put in an updated and simplified vaccine guidelines, so the vaccine schedule that we recommend for all animals who come into our care. Hopefully everyone knows the recommendation is that we start all vaccines on every animal regardless of their health at 4 weeks of age. You're going to have to make a hard case for me on some animal that you wouldn't vaccinate. The surgery section also includes dentistry. It was mentioned to us yesterday that dentals, huge impact on the quality of life and something that's really, really hard for a lot of people to access and afford. So we felt it really important that we could provide some guidelines on some recommendations for dentistry in our surgery section. Again, behavior, lots of changes there. Lots of resources and practical tips, and yeah, we looked at a lot of references about why it is and guidance on what we wanted to put in this document. Okay, so some specifics to what's new in this document. So one of the unacceptables, and we've always called it the mother of all guidelines, is in the population management section. It was in the original one, and we kept it in the second one, and that's operating beyond an organization's capacity for care is an unacceptable practice. So it's a pretty big one. It needed to stay, and it's sort of what governs all the other. If you're not within your capacity for care, I'm just going to tell you, achieving the rest of the guidelines is going to be pretty difficult. This is where we wanted to incorporate the community as much as we could, because what has been and continues to be really important to me is recognizing that an animal entering the shelter's care is a big, hairy deal. Not just from protecting them from shelter-acquired illness or shelter-acquired behavior, but it's a point in time that changes the trajectory of their life forever. They could have been just fine where they were. They knew everything, they were familiar with it, they knew the people around them, they knew who cared for them, they knew where their food was coming from, and in an instant, it all changes. And from that point forward, it could all change. That's an immense responsibility that we have that we need to recognize and try and avoid, not to mention the person attached to that animal. Removing a person from their animal is a big, hairy deal. In an instant, we change the trajectory of that animal, that person's life. It may not, and we do it 10, 20, 30 times a day sometimes, and we can get numb to it because it's just another animal that comes into the shelter. Every single one of them has someone attached to them. Every single one of them had a life they knew and were familiar with. So it is a big, hairy deal for an animal to come into our shelter, and I really wanted that emphasized in the population management section through our statements, that we have to prioritize retention over intake. Every time an animal comes to us, we need to evaluate, must consider whether admission really is the best and only option, and that we have to start continuing to work on removing barriers to local outcomes, getting animals back to where they came from. We have to stop the one-way movement of animals who are in vulnerable situations and moving to where we feel they're safer and better. We have to stop that flow. So, and also, while live release rate is important, but it is irresponsible to only look at live release rate and not in the context of everything else that's happening within the shelter. I do not believe, I never have believed, that you have to choose one over the other. You don't need to choose life-saving over welfare. They're symbiotic, and when we achieve one, we achieve the other. All right, I'm a little passionate about that section. Okay. Again, this one, the behavior and mental well-being, lots of changes here, but the one I want to call out the most is that there is no longer a recommendation that animals who come into shelters have to have a formal behavior evaluation. Yeah, thank you, Gandhi. Stop doing them, okay? I just took that off your list of things to do. It's really unfair. So I'm talking about the battery type tests that we do where you subject an animal to seemingly more aggressive, more intrusive interactions to see how they react. Lots of studies to show why that is ineffective. For example, they did one on food guarding and were able to prove that you get positive, false positives and false negatives. So dogs that would food guard in the shelter would go home and not do it, and vice versa. It's just not predictive. Animals are extremely, they respond to the environment that they're in, just as we all do. I'm sure you're all different here than you are at home. When you're comfortable, you react one way. When you are stressed, you react another. Animals are the same way. So there is really no way to predict what an animal is going to do in a home certainly not based on what we're seeing in the shelter. It's really unfair to do that. It is our responsibility to share what we observe. So gather as much information we can from the person bringing in the animal. So even someone who found an animal still had to get to it, probably had to put it in their car, quite possibly had a child or another animal, maybe a turtle, I don't know, in their car when they brought it in. Like, there's information that can be shared. If it is someone's own pet, what can they tell us about it? And then, is there something we can do about it so they don't need to come in? But then every interaction we have with an animal, we can share our observations. We don't have to diagnose them. We don't have to say the animal was aggressive, but we can say, wow, when, I went to assault this animal, didn't like it, turned its head, whatever. So, but every interaction we have with an animal can be recorded, it can be shared, with the caveat, this is what we saw in the shelter. Because what we're looking for are things that need to be managed when they leave. Because I don't need them to be perfect citizens within the shelter, I need them to be successful when they go home. So, what can we identify to then help people when the animal goes home to be successful? Because training, who actually needs to be trained when we're talking about training? Us, me. I need to know how to manage the animal. And again, the success is going to be my knowledge and what I'm willing to put up with, the skills that I feel I have, so that my dog or cat can live successfully together. So really want to have more emphasis on helping people and animals be successful out of the shelter. And really, our goal in the shelter is to just help them not acquire disease or acquire shelter-related behavior. So, okay, I wasn't an author on this section, but apparently I'm also pretty passionate about that one. Okay, no, that's not true. I care about this section too. I think we all need to get back to our roots and ask ourselves, why the heck do we do this work in the first place? And why do we do it now? Why do we do it in this climate? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And what of what we're doing is working towards that goal, and what of what we're doing is working against it? And are we actually talking about all people when we talk about what it is that we're doing? Does it treat everyone with equity? So that is where this sort of starts. The foundation of this section is that there needs to be a purposeful plan of what it is that we do every day. Okay, and then this is one of the new sections, and in complete honesty, I was really nervous about including this section. I didn't want it, but I remained curious as to why my colleagues felt it was so important. And we all agreed that at no point in this document would we ever put abuse and neglect together or use them interchangeably. Because there is a difference when we talk about intent. So abuse has a intent to harm an animal. But when we talk about neglect, there were some amazing stories yesterday, some graphic images of a way an animal could present to us that very much looks like neglect. But it is not for lack of caring. It is not for lack of trying on anyone's part. It's just a lack of resources and support to provide the care that the animal needs. So it is very, very clearly laid out when an animal presents with a neglect type situation, that there is more curiosity to find out what it is that we can do to support the people, to remedy the situation, and just help the person and the animal get the support that they need. Random assortment there. Okay, and then disaster response. This one was added because we are seeing both an increase in number and intensity of both human-caused and natural disasters. So we wanted at least a little something in here. This is not how you're going to lay out your whole response plan, but it's the start of guidance and then resources you can look towards so that you can feel, you and your organization can feel ready when the next big event, whatever it's going to be, occurs. Okay. Okay, so that's a lot. So you're like, okay, so what the heck do I do with this thing? The idea is that you start with addressing the unacceptable practices. Quite possible, I think there's about 20-some unacceptable practices in here. You're probably already meeting them. Caveat, the capacity for care one, that's a big one. So start there. Make sure all your unacceptables are addressed and that you are not doing any unacceptable practices. At that point, you get to dive into the musts and the shoulds. Look at first of all, check off what you've already done, feel good about it. And then the ones that you still need to work on, sort them out by importance to you and the resources that you're going to take for implementation. And then from there, you can move on to looking at some of the ideals and if you can start to achieve those. We've put together some tools to help with the implementation. I personally, I use the sortable Excel spreadsheet, love me the Excel, but it allows you to, first of all, check off the ones you've already done, so like, let's not even worry about those, you can sort them out, but then you can sort it in terms of priority for you and what you want to work on. You can put in notes like who's responsible and what the plan is to start to achieve them. We also have other supplemental resources. If you go on the website, all of the authors did some recordings to talk about their sections, so you can hear more about some of the highlights from each section, why it is we came to it, and then some examples of the guidelines in action. That sounds much more exciting than it is, but it's kind of fun, just how shelters have implemented some of the how they looked at their shelter and saw they weren't achieving some of the guidelines and what they did to be able to follow them. So we offer this document. It's a tool. It's a tool to help guide the care that we all know we can and want to achieve for the animals in our care. And to also hopefully help you all know that we care about the people just as much as the animals. So join the ASV if you're not already. I am not on the Book of Faces, but I do participate in the Facebook group because we do have some pretty lively discussions about things shelter related and not. You never know what's going to show up in there. We do try to connect people. We have position statements, which can be really handy when you want to do something, know how the ASV feels about them. Someone yesterday mentioned that we have a spay-neuter guidelines. As a note, our recommendation is actually to do desexing on kittens at 6 weeks. We support that wholeheartedly. They're way cuter. Once they're under that surgical, what am I talking about? Anesthesia, but yeah, the drape, thank you. I'm like, it's in there. You don't know what size they are. They're just under there. You make sure you didn't hit the bladder, you have the peritoneal fluid, whatever. Fine, go ahead. We also, I mean, even behaviorally, they say totally fine. So anyway, go down to 6 weeks, should you feel comfortable, and that is it. So thank you very much. Be sure to check it out and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.